All right, all right, all right. What's up, everybody? It's your mom's favorite podcasters. I am your co-host, Joel Cheesman, joined as always, the Richards to my Jagger, Chad Sowash is in the house. You guys are watching Embracing the AI Shift, Why AI is the Key to Unlocking Recruiting Efficiency, sponsored by the good folks at GEM. And we are excited to welcome Dr. Mona Sloane, professor at the University of Virginia, and Keith Sonderling, commissioner at the United States EEOC, and also a graduate of the University of Florida. Rumor has it he has a Tim Tebow tattoo somewhere on his body, but that we'll save that for a different show. Guys,
it's a lower back tat. It's a lower back tat.
Don't say it ain't a tramp stamp
for
Keith.
A different
say
podcast.
It ain't so. Say it ain't so. Guys, welcome to the conversation. We'll try to keep it intelligent.
Good luck. And anybody who's out there watching, please feel free in the comments section to add comments, add questions, all that other fun stuff, whether it's for Keith, Mona, or Chad or Cheese. Either way,
you don't get a lot of opportunities to talk to the commissioner of the EEOC. So if you have questions, concerns, if you think you're skirting the law, this is your chance to get a out of free from jail card, because this is all anonymous. This is your chance, everybody.
That's right.
Yeah, it's anonymous, because this isn't going to be all over the interwebs anytime soon. Yes, it is. Okay, so the very first question right out of the gate for all the kids at home, Mona, can you just give us like a basic overview of what is meant by AI?
That is a great question. And I think we can agree on that. We don't really have a definition yet. That's something we're all sort of still grappling with, and sort of more recently, very prominent AI figures have chimed in more decidedly on that question and are warning us off something like the artificial general intelligence, super intelligence. That's probably for another discussion. But what I will say is, with my professor and sociologist hat on, is that it is very useful to think about artificial intelligence with regards to the ways in which it is making an impact on social life and our everyday interactions. And I think in that context, it is helpful to say, well, we can define artificial intelligence as computer systems that use predictive analytics to support decision-making in the professions, in our private lives, in semi-automated or fully automated processes. So I would actually say artificial intelligence is an automated decision tool, and it plays out differently with different systems and different contexts, but that's how I would define it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keith,
and
a little bit more from the EEOC, maybe.
Oh, I think it's more from the HR perspective and the perspective of our world, because if we get too lost into what is AI, what are these fancy definitions that you need 4 PhDs to understand? Look, we're never going to understand, or at least me, and I know. Well, Mona's smarter than all of us for that, and she will never understand, how this actually works. But in all seriousness, the technology is one thing, and we try to figure out what these definitions are, and how we, is it machine learning, is it artificial intelligence, is it quantum computing, natural language, all these different things. It's sort of a distraction. So what I've been trying to do is saying, well, how does this work in HR? How does it work in the world we know? Right. So we have 2 different buckets now when it comes to AI in HR. And before, in the discussions we've had before the whole ChatGPT and generative AI discussion, it was very much about AI being used to make decisions that HR professionals were making by hand with pen and paper or in their brain. Right. So there's all these AI tools, prior to ChatGPT in the HR talent acquisition benefit space that were just replicating and amplifying decisions made by HR professionals, since the Industrial Revolution, for 100 years. So that is the one use of it that was really talked about, popular. But now with ChatGPT and generative AI within HR, it's a completely different discussion, and it's a completely different definition, because now when it's AI is generating things or in HR too, you're talking about workforce displacement and who are we going to displace worker-wise, and now AI is going to be doing the work of your workforce in addition to doing some of the work of AI, which leads to a whole different legal, ethical conversation about, well, now who's going to be displaced? What jobs are we displacing? What is the socioeconomic breakdown, the gender breakdown, the race breakdown of those people we're displacing, which is also going to be falling on HR. So it's two sort of different definition uses in the sense, but it's all from that nucleus of AI.
Well, also the outcomes piece, right? So what actually came out of all those decisions, and where do you pinpoint? And I think the hardest thing, because this is really no change from what you do today, right? Other than the scale of it. I mean, that's really the big difference here. Am I correct, Keith?
Absolutely, and that's the part of this is it's going to be making whether it's employment decisions or employment recommendations, everything related to the HR world. It's just scaling those decisions at faster, broader than we've ever seen before, and especially with employers in high turnover industries like retail or fast food that are used to having to make these huge, massive employment shifts in their workforce. Now it can be done instantly, or companies that are getting hundreds of thousands or millions of resumes before, where you didn't have the actual workforce in HR to be able to do some of these tasks just because of the sheer volume. Now it can be done instantly. And I think that's really what is so critical when you talk about how do we regulate this, how do we use it. It's just the scale of decision making that is occurring here is like nothing we've ever seen.
Yeah. So we currently have 4 people here that live this stuff every day, and we can't really agree on what it means and where this is going. I have to imagine state governments, local governments, on the national side are trying to figure this stuff out as well. Keith, break down a little bit of what states are doing now to define these things, what laws are starting to be passed or talked about that our listeners should be aware of.
So, especially in the employment space, when things get in the news and things are hot and popular, everyone wants to get involved in it. And that's why you've seen more recently here in Washington, D.C., broadly, let's take a step outside of labor and employment right now, just a rush to regulate AI, really not just in D.C., across the world. And what we're seeing now with all these CEOs coming to testify in Congress, that from a national federal level, people want, some action from Congress. People want some action from D.C. The White House last year put out their Bill of Rights, which set the very generic framework related to using AI across businesses, across use in the criminal justice system, really any use of AI that affects citizens of the U.S., which is very broad. But now we're seeing, in the absence of how Congress works, in the absence of creating a new federal agency or new legislation, which takes a long time, as all of you know, across the country. It takes us a long time in DC just to make a budget every single year, which is going to come up again very quickly. So that's with that void, we're starting to see state and local governments getting involved and trying to fill in the equation there and regulate AI, specifically with HR. Really, just a quick brief history. The first time we saw any state government regulate AI was in Illinois, related to the facial recognition, artificial intelligence video act, where they would basically make it very difficult, if not impossible, to use artificial intelligence video recognition software during an interview. And with the consent requirements, with the having to delete some of the data, et cetera. And then Maryland, not too long after that, made a similar law relating to using AI video facial recognition in interviews. But the real larger one was in New York City, specifically with their local law 144. And I'll let Mona talk about this as well. But it was really the first more encompassing in the recruiting side to deal with regulating AI in HR. And we need to dissect some of the good things out of that law, the bad things out of that law, or what is going to be replaced. So New York was really the first one. New York City was the first one to dive into that as well. And if Mona wants to chime in on local law 144, that was really sort of the one that got everyone's attention and saying, well, now we need to do something because there's a law in the books. And I have a lot to say about existing laws on the books, which we can come back to, that have always been there since the 1960s.
Right. That still work. Yeah.
That still work. That still have, a more encompassing framework. But I'll let Mona talk briefly about New York City.
We're the MCs here, buddy. I'll bring Mona in.
Well,
So Mona, why don't you come in and talk about 144? But you're doing some really exciting stuff around AI and recruiting. So really, you have the floor to talk about what you're doing, 144, and whatever else you want to sort of introduce us to.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Commissioner, for that cue as well. So I am very much interested in understanding how AI systems affect discretionary decision-making in the professions. And the profession that I'm focused on is HR and HR professionals. So folks who are sourcing talent or assessing talent, who are bringing people in, who are assessing work performance and so on. And what I found in my research is that really AI, first of all, the AI that is being used in HR is really an ecosystem of various systems. It's not just one AI that does everything. HR professionals are very good at very quickly sussing out what technology, what system works well for what. If it's, finding people or assessing them. And so they use all of these in conjunction with one another, sometimes not necessarily in the ways in which the vendors have envisioned that. So I think that's important for us to understand at what points an AI actually comes into a decision-making process within HR. And then the other thing that I've found is that AI doesn't really, partially because it is this ecosystem that they're working in, doesn't really fully replace decision-making in HR, especially in low-volume recruiting. It just reconfigures it. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that and what that means in the context of what I call a Boolean way of looking at the world. And I hear laughs. So,
yes.
And how that clashes with AI and especially semantic search and now ChatGPT. And so that's really what I'm interested in, figuring out how can we actually understand how AI affects HR, and how can we then not just sit behind our desk in the academy and think about that and write smart papers to get those 4 PhDs that the commissioner spoke about, but how can we also engage with journalists, with regulators, with folks from other fields to figure out a good way to put guardrails around these technologies so that everybody benefits.
So let's dig into like New York. So we've got New York City that, Keith was just talking about. There's like this rush to regulate. And Joel and I both, I think we predicted that, this is, if we expect the government to get it right the first time, I think we're pretty naive. It's going to take some baby steps to get there. And then we saw the new proposed regulations out of the state of New York, which really closes a lot of those loopholes up. So Keith, as you're seeing California, which is even more, I think, progressive than what we're seeing in New York, can you give us kind of like an idea of what we should expect? Let's say from the standpoint of a practitioner and then also a vendor, especially around the California regulations.
Yeah, and it's just important to to remind everyone that whether you're in New York or California, sometimes it doesn't feel this way. Federal law still applies there, and we have many protected characteristics that we cover here under Title VII at the EEOC that's been around since the 1960s. And you can't lose sight of the fact with all these proposals or all these varying requirements, that states may impose, that, you still have those obligations under federal employment law. So, for instance, in New York, that the law that went into effect in July, it's limited towards hiring and promotions, and the pre-deployment audit that they require, which is a good thing, which you can be doing regardless of a state or local government telling you to do so. And a lot of very prudent employers do employment audits, not that they're being forced to by a state law, because it's the right thing to do. And they want to ensure that there's no discrimination in any of their employment practices. So, with New York, about doing that bias audit, about having it done by an independent audit, but really only requiring a audit relating to race, sex, and ethnicity. Well, from the EEOC's perspective, you're liable if you discriminate somebody on age discrimination, if you discriminate somebody against disability, religious discrimination, or really any of the categories we discussed, pregnancy, LGBT, and that's not covered in those audit requirements. So in a sense, it gives employers in that area a false sense of security that's saying, hey, we are using this AI tool, in New York, in New York City, and we've done an audit and we're good, we're not going to have any issues. And our laws cover A to Z of the employment relationship. Here we're talking about in New York, the hiring and promotion, where the EEOC federal law covers the entire employee life cycle from hiring to firing to promotions to wages, trainings, benefits, really all the terms and conditions of your employment that we know that there's AI software out there that is actively making employment decisions on. So this whole, getting lost in, well, New York says we have to do this, or New York City says we don't have to do this or this in an audit. You have to be doing all of it, encompassing anyway for federal law. So that's where I think some of the distraction is when it comes to these local laws, is that we're telling you to do something. Well, you've had to do it since, the EEOC existed in the 1960s. But that being said, like even in New York, the way the final rule came out, as far as there's still questions now. Well, is AI being used to actually make the candidate, or is it one of many factors? What is the weight giving to it? Which, doing that analysis, it may not even be an automated employment decision tool if it doesn't meet their strict definition of what that is, which is very loose. So like scoring, classification, or recommendation, is it the actual employment decision that's being made based on that? Or is there some human oversight in there that may not subject to the law? So you see, when a city comes in and tries to regulate a very complex area with longstanding laws, it can cause some confusion about compliance and standardizing some of those definitions.
Which is why you need help, right? I mean, seriously, we should have, especially, if you're a major Fortune 500 company, you should have people that are focused on bringing all the pieces of compliance together in this huge puzzle, because you do have local, state, and federal. And that being said, let's go ahead and dig a little bit deeper into the newer proposed regulations out of New York. So a bill was introduced in the state of New York Senate, which would impose statewide requirements regulating tools that incorporate AI to assist in employee monitoring, and then also employee decision-making process, the actual hiring process. I'm just going to jump into the decision-making process. The bill makes it unlawful for employers or employment agencies to use these decision-making software products in employment decisions without conducting a bias audit within the past year. Employers must notify employees or candidates at least 10 days before using these types of tools for assessments, and then also candidates can request alternative selection process or accommodations. This is going to be a process that has to be put in place by employers if they want to use this tech, right? So there's got to be a messaging component to it in itself, correct? I mean, there's got to be a lot that's happening here for employers just to get ready to use AI in the state of New York.
Yeah, I mean, if this goes through, there's going to be certainly a lot more requirements, much more than the New York City proposal. And it also brings up, an interesting point on, the notice, the consent. From a law enforcement perspective, people are constantly asking me, well, what kind of AI discrimination cases have you brought? What are the actual claims of discriminating employees being discriminated against by these, computer programs or these machines? And it's very hard for a few reasons to answer that question, is because when employees are discriminated against, you don't get a job. You don't know whether it's a biased hiring manager that's not hiring you for a discriminatory reason, or if it was an algorithm that was programmed to eliminate you from the applicant pool based upon a protected characteristic, either intentionally or unintentionally. So without some of these notice or consent, whatever you want to call it, requirements, where it's really hard for applicants or employees to know that they were actually discriminated against based upon an algorithm, based upon machine learning. And the cases even so wouldn't come to us as this is AI discrimination. Just like, during COVID time, everyone's asking, what are the COVID cases early on, and saying, we don't know yet because the case comes in as discrimination, right? So it's sex discrimination, it's religious discrimination. And then we have to do the investigation to see, if it was COVID related at the time or if it, algorithmic related here. So, from a enforcement perspective, these new consent requirements that states are proposing will give employees the knowledge that they're being subject to, an algorithmic tool. And if something does go wrong, maybe they start bringing cases related to the AI. We're just not there yet from a federal level. That's not going to happen outside of changes in the law. I mean, that's why you see some of these states filling in the gap. Very much like, to equate it to pay transparency, like you're seeing across the board, states requiring, the pay transparency in the job advertisements. There's no federal requirement that, but if you see the range and you're not in that range, or you're in that current job and you're outside of that on the lower end of that range, that could be a way to bring pay discrimination cases. So I kind of analogize it to that because those requirements generally lead to more cases.
So Mona, as you continue to research AI, especially in the space of HR, HR is incredibly slow to adopt. But this is something that we're starting to see from not just a tech landscape standpoint, but from the amount of vendors that first and foremost have been long-standing core vendors, and they're automatically adopting AI. And then we have obviously all of these new startups, and many of them are becoming AI domain-specific, conversational and or generative AI. So all the research that you've done, have you seen that this space is actually moving fast forward more at warp speed than normal? What have you seen in your research?
That's a great question. Look, I think that I would actually say that HR is actually fairly quick in adopting technology, mostly because workloads grow enormously and resources are withdrawn from HR departments. And so there's this sort of, need to use technology just to be able to do the job. I would agree with the commissioner that generative AI truly has changed everything. So, and it hasn't, just changed HR. It has changed our everyday life, everything we do in the academy, at the university, how we teach, how we think about pedagogy, how we are interacting with students in the classroom, how we're doing research. So I think we've seen that shift in HR as well, or are seeing that sort of really transformative moment. I have, research also on the negative impacts of generative AI, because let's not forget, generative AI is, as the title kind of says, a system that infers content, and so therefore can make content up. If that is, images, or if that is, for example, a transcription that is off or something. So we really need to understand how that fundamental change that we are seeing through generative AI is affecting specific use cases within HR, and if they are actually potentially leading to discrimination, as the commissioner has just described.
Outstanding. Comment from Kyle for you, Mona. That's a hot take, saying that HR is quick to adopt any kind of tech, let alone HR. We have a good question also from Stephen Britton. He understands that employers are accountable for any bias and discrimination. However, this is probably one for Keith. Where does accountability fall on the AI software?
Oh, hello, California.
And a little context for anyone watching. HireVue, who's already been sort of mentioned in the Illinois case,
facial recognition,
changed their terms of conditions last year, I think, to basically say it's on you if there's a violation. Like, we're not responsible. Keith, where do you guys fall on the vendor side of accountability?
Vendors are not responsible for employment decisions. And this is really, people don't realize this. Unlike other software areas, when you're dealing with civil rights in the workplace, the only party liable for employment action is the employer themselves. And the EEOC has jurisdiction over three parties: employers, staffing agencies, and unions. And that's it. And that's our world. So any decision made, whether it's made by a biased recruiting manager or it's made by a biased algorithm, it doesn't matter. The employer is 100% liable for that employment action. And that's really where some of the why the infrastructures that need to be built around using AI is so critical internally for companies who are adopting use of these programs across the board, because ultimately they're going to be liable for whatever the tool does, good and bad. And whether that law will change at some point is another question. But what we're seeing is in the EU, for instance, in their proposed EU AI Act, that they are going to make vendors liable. Mm-hmm. And there's a proposal out of California, out of their Civil Rights Commission, to amend their state code relating to the laws that the California Civil Rights Division enforces to make vendors have share in the liability there. So whether or not vendors have actual legal liability hasn't been tested in the courts either, even under contractual theories. But for our point at the EEOC under federal law, for the time being, for a long time, unless these laws are amended, you as the employer are liable for whatever tool, whatever decision you make.
Awesome. Let's stick with you, Keith. You mentioned in your previous answer, you talked about independent audit. I think a lot of our viewers right now are a little confused about what is an audit, who does it, is there an official directory of companies that will green check my company and what we're doing. I'm sure there are a lot of questions about how do I, keep the belts and suspenders on in terms of following the rule of the law. What advice would you give them on the audit side and how to do that?
So this is, again, where the New York City law created some confusion, because it says that there needs to be a pre-deployment audit, a yearly audit, and it needs to be done by an independent auditor. And that hadn't happened before. And there's no requirement under federal law to do an audit in anything. Now, like I said before, a lot of employers do it, and generally it's done through a combination. It can be done internally through HR, through legal, or a combination of both, to see that what the results are before ever allowing the tools, whether it's an employment assessment test based on pencil and paper or advanced AI, to see what the results are before you actually let it make a decision on someone's livelihood. And that could have just been done by anyone. But a lot of the audits are done generally in coordination with outside advisors, outside accountants. Industry and organizational psychologists really are equipped very well to be able to look at some of these employment assessments and to see if they're actually related to the job at hand, if they actually can prove the skills related to that, or if not. But also lawyers have generally done a lot of the pay equity analysis or any of the discriminatory analysis related to policies or procedure. So there was no standard definition before of what that means, but New York now says that needs to be independent, which obviously adds an additional layer of cost. But I've always said that doesn't matter who is doing the audit, whether it's internal or externally, at least you're doing something. At least you're engaging and trying to be compliant with these systems. And I think that's a good thing, because if you could find discrimination, if you can find pay inequity in advance and cure it before the government ever has to come in, or class action lawyers have to come in, or that person is harmed, I think that's a really good thing. So I've always encouraged those self audits essentially, but the New York requirement of the independent certainly has thrown a wrench into what that definition is mean. And the law is so new, we haven't really seen who are being used for that purpose.
Yeah. Mona, I know you have a take on this as well.
I do, yeah. So I have a couple of takes on this. The first one is, of course, that I agree. I think it's extremely important to conduct these audits or have them conducted, whether that is voluntarily at the moment or eventually as part of compliance. One of the added reasons for that is that the laws that we're expecting, at least in the EU, the EU AI Act also mandates that these bias audits are being made public, so we can expect a building up of a database of bias audits for the industry, which is extremely important data for us to understand what potential employment discrimination by way of AI looks like today. I will also add that the little word bias in front of the audit is important, but is not the only sort of important cue here, because you are, at the end of the day, in a bias audit in the way in which they are currently being conducted, looking at disparate impact, which is important. But what this doesn't allow you to examine is the question, is this even a meaningful measurement exercise that we're doing here? So if you have an instrument that measures something that is stable, that doesn't necessarily mean that is the right thing that you're measuring. In other words, if you are, as somebody who buys a license in an HR department or as a vendor, you should also ask yourself, well, what am I trying to do here? Do future employees really need to have a particular personality type, or do they need to perform very well in this one type of game? Is that really relevant to the job? And so I would always, or at this point of the conversation, and I have this conversation very often, I always point to the fact that we need to use the emphasis on AI audits to ask these more fundamental questions moving forward.
Yeah, I'd like to say that, like, around with what Keith said earlier, around, it doesn't matter if it's AI, RPA, I mean, any automation whatsoever, it's about the outcomes. And then being able to understand throughout that audit, taking a look at your outcomes, and then identifying where things are going wrong within the process after you scale into the actual process. Now, when we take a look at audits, I almost feel like this is a trap, Keith. Tell me. They say once a year. And if you are a big organization and you are now scaling with AI, you already make a bunch of human decisions today. Now you start to scale with AI, and you're getting millions of these decisions that are being made by AI, not just yearly. We're talking about the prospect of monthly, right? So in a year, well, I did my annual audit. More than likely, you should be auditing much more frequent.
Yeah,
every year.
I can make it even more chaotic. So, like, okay, so for the New York City, the once a year or whatever these other proposals are going to be. Okay, so check the box, you did it. There was no discrimination at that time, and then the next day you change a metric of what a skills should be, or what a job requirement should be, or throw in a college degree requirement, or any of that, and it completely changes the model and completely changes the result. And technically, you're in compliance with that law at the time you did it. And what is so I don't want to say what makes this conversation so difficult for us is that when we do an investigation, we're looking at the results of that one use for that one job description in that one location in that one part of the country, looking at what the data is of who the applicant pool and flow is, and what metrics was going into the AI, and if that was actually relevant to the job and a business necessity for that position. And that is done per job description. That's per job recommendation. Yeah. And it varies wherever you are. For large multi-state employers, that can vary completely across different regions, different industries. So it's really this one time, okay, we checked the box, we did a yearly audit. If there's employment discrimination, we're going to look at what went into that exact accusation at that exact place. So that's why, in a sense, you can't be. It's not a complete security of doing it at one time and just saying your AI is lawful, and that's why it's so important. And I do think AI can actually help here. To help employers who want to take that skills-based approach, who want to use this to actually find the right candidates to do jobs that they'd be best at, that they may not even know they're good at, to actually adjust what those skills and those metrics and those job recommendations are in real time to find the best candidates, and not just have one long-term old job description out there that's going to unintentionally eliminate a lot of qualified applicants from the applicant pool based upon those protected characteristics. So you got to look at it both ways, where, yeah, it's a lot of work, but it could also help completely reduce discrimination and get people in the proper jobs.
Well, that being said, Mona, so when you're performing research and you're looking for these types of things, what do you do? Help us, wrap our head around this. It's not that easy.
No, it's not. And I should say, I'm a sociologist. I'm a qualitative researcher, but I do collaborate very, very closely with data scientists, with machine learning engineers, with folks who are in information science, with journalists, with regulators, for example, with the ILO. Or employment organizations. So what I do when I do research is I interview professionals. That is one thing. The other thing that I do is I observe I call the field, what is going on, who are the vendors, what are they actually offering, and then sort of my very applied work is actually about conducting audits and also thinking about what these transparency requirements that we've been hearing about today that are in these regulations could look like concretely for HR. So what can we actually, or should we actually meaningfully convey in this human-machine decision-making process about how the machine comes to a recommendation that is actually meaningful and impactful for the profession of HR specifically. And so that, you can ask a question for any profession, for any process, but the answer to that will look different. What a nurse practitioner will have to know about a sepsis prediction tool is very different. What an HR professional needs to know about the prediction of the most suitable candidates on a job platform. And so this is really like asking these questions and trying to answer them based on the research and thinking about what that can technically look like is also a big part of my work.
And that's why she has a PH and a D after her name. Guys, we're about 9 minutes left, so if you have a question, it's a good time to ask it. Keith, if I had the applause soundbite, I would click it. You guys just threw down, I guess, or just had a company called iTutor Group. Listeners of our show will know how the case played out, but I want to hear from you the offense, how it played out, and what essentially what the penalty was.
The penalty was around $350,000, and I have to be careful here because it's, when we talk about AI in the workplace, we're really talking about using machine learning to look for patterns and recognitions related to skills, attrition, salary, all this stuff within HR. This case was a little unique, although it's been getting really splashy headlines about what it is versus what it wasn't. So basically, for older workers who applied to this job after with a certain birth date, we're automatically just getting rejected. This is like not sophisticated machine learning. I even think that Joel can probably figure out how to make a code for that. This is really basic stuff. Like,
I wouldn't go that far. Yeah. I would not go that far. Like, no, don't
1955 or below. No, 1955, 6 and above. Yes. So pretty much that simple. So it wasn't one of these sophisticated, crazy algorithmic discrimination cases, which we were all fearing if these products are used the wrong way, whether based off discriminatory data set or discriminatory input. So it's not that. It's getting a lot of big headlines that it is, just so everyone knows. So the applicant applied using her birth date, was rejected. Applicant applied using a younger birth date and was accepted. Pretty simple, right? So, in that case, it was based off some sort of code, again, whether it's AI or not. And also some difficulties there because it was a Chinese company, and there may be some questions under Chinese law if that is allowed or not, even though it doesn't matter because they're in the United States. That defense doesn't work. Don't try it. That it's legal somewhere else. That's where we're from. But it shows though the heightened interest in these cases, and for that we talked about earlier with the. How does an employee know they're being discriminated by an algorithm? Mm-hmm. Well, if you're applying for a job at 3 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday and you get automatically rejected and then reapply and get accepted, there's some sort of non-human component into that has been programmed there. So, but it is certainly getting a lot of attention. It's good that we're able to bring some computer-related coding case. So a very interesting facts. And that's why you have to get so granular with these facts.
Is the EEOC doing anything at scale to test these things about 3 a.m. or different birthdays, like automating submissions to jobs to find that? Because I would think that relying on humans or whistleblowers would be much less efficient than if you were building bots to apply.
So this is really a tricky situation from an enforcement perspective. And unlike, Department of Labor, OSHA, right? An OSHA inspector can walk into any business and demand to see the safety records and do a safety inspections. Our jurisdiction here at the EEOC is limited to charges of discrimination. So we really need employees or applicants to come to us and say, we were discriminated against, and we believe it's on the basis of age. We believe it's on the basis of sex, et cetera. And then we can launch a full-scale investigation from them, but it requires that. So in this sense, look, it was an applicant coming, and we are an investigative body. We don't have the resources to be applying to every testing every employer's applicant tracking system, but it's really dependent on the employees coming forward as well. Unless there have been situations where news articles have been come out that this is happening, or in a sense whistleblower. And I don't like to call them whistleblowers in this context because they're victims of discrimination, but people within HR departments saying this discrimination is happening, tipping us off, then we can start our own investigation there through a commissioner. But those are charged, it's called, but those are fairly rare. But yeah, we're really dependent on employees and applicants bringing us these cases. Well,
commissioner-led charges, or at least cases, have gone from, I think it was 3 last year to 20, almost 30 this year. So you guys have been busy, commissioners.
Yeah, and obviously we can't talk about those because those are ongoing law enforcement, but it's a very important tool. It's a tool that Congress gave to commissioners to bring the charges in our own name, but we need some basis from that. And a lot of times they really do come from investigative reporting, journalists, academics who have seen this in their work, and they tip us off to that. And then we're able to bring a full-scale investigation. Some of our largest cases have started that way. So it really shows the importance of the academic work, of the journalistic work in this AI space. And there's a lot of it that really helps us in doing our job and helps raise awareness of the potential issues for applicants and employees.
So next question is for both of you. I'm going to start with Mona. We can talk about the highest risks, right? So what do you believe are the biggest risks for companies using AI? And then how, two-part question, how can hiring companies safeguard against those risks?
I'm so glad this question has been put on the docket. So I think the biggest risk is that we are going to see a deployment of various AI tools in the existing infrastructure of human resources and human resources activity without a knowledge that this is actually happening, right? Layers and layers deeper, you actually find that there is this little AI widget that is doing something to the system that you're using for something else, and you don't quite know what it is doing and how, and you're seeing different results. So I think that is a huge risk, is the sort of B2B side of things that folks are not aware of. I think what folks can do, and I get this question often also from journalists, is that kind of trust observations in interaction with the technology. I have encountered HR professionals who are actually already seeing sometimes, saying, well, I think there's a little bit of bias here or there, and really ask or demand, ask critical questions when these licenses are being purchased. And if they don't have a say in that, demand that. So kind of loops a little bit back to, decision-making and organizing in the workplace. But, having the real professionals ask these questions that they need to know about a system. What are you trying to test? How are you testing? What data are you using? How's it folding into what I'm doing? I think is a very good start, and then build that out into sort of more established sort of procurement processes. I think that would be my tip.
Okay. Keith, biggest risk and how to safeguard against it.
Well, there's not just one biggest risk, and question that often I get asked, and it actually came up in the chat, is around, well, should we use systems in this area or should we not, right? Or is the EEOC going to say, or the government saying, this is an acceptable use of AI, this you should never use? And it's still a free country, so if employers want to use AI to discriminate, they can. There'll be significant consequences if they do so. I don't think you can look at it in a sense where this is the one risk for using AI in HR. I think for each use of AI in HR, again, the entire employee life cycle, there's technology out there to assist HR professionals or just do the work for them. You have to say, okay, well, what are the potential benefits of doing this, and what are the potential harms? And all of that is based upon two things: if it's how the AI is designed and how it's implemented. Because if it's properly designed and carefully implemented, it can actually do what it's supposed to do. But that takes a lot of work from the data set, from the input side and the result side. And then, because if it's, not properly designed, just flip it, right? And somebody can go in there and tinker with all the metrics and you discriminate. Or carelessly implemented, say it is properly designed, and you're then, using the discriminatory data sets of just men or whatever the situation is, you're going to have that biased results. So for each use of the AI, there's potential risk and potential harm. And first you need to decide, well, what am I going to use? What software am I going to use, and what purpose am I going to use it for? And then you can have the discussion, well, here's the risks for using it, like natural language processing in interviews through an app, through a chatbot. It can really eliminate discrimination in a sense because you don't see the person. But at the same time, if the AI can't detect a foreign accent or a disability, it's going to discriminate on that side, even though you bought it to not see the person, to see if they have a foreign accent or what they look like. So you can see for each use, there's pros and cons. And that's where the difficulty is. And that's where the time it takes to really study the product, work with the vendors, ask the tough questions, and then testing it before you actually ever use it to make an employment decision. So it's not a question you can answer to say, here's the number one risk from our perspective. All of it has risks, just like any other decision.
Let me boil all that down for you kids, because it seems very simple. Don't do it yourself. HR, CHROs, TA, heads of recruiting, get an expert in there to do this. You just heard all of that. Tell me you're not scared shitless. Get somebody in there that actually knows what they're doing so that they can focus on getting this done right.
Outstanding. Well, we have a few minutes left. I wanted to get to another viewer question. This is from Emmy Baradugo, who is a massive fan of the podcast, by the way. Yes. Emmy asks, can you talk a little bit more about the fact that employers must notify candidates and employees no less than 10 business days before use of the AI employment decision-making tools? She's assuming that this must be done in writing, but she's not sure. Talk about that.
The answer is yes, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's you talk about the different requirements. Federal law doesn't require that. If one state is going to require it, and another city is not, and then are you going to then implement that for all your AI tools nationwide, if you're not required to, because you have to build out another system to have consent or not consent, and then you're targeting people, like say, for instance, in New York City, which I think is what they're referring to. Are you going to build for applicants in New York City based upon their VPN location or wherever they are, consent, but then outside you don't use that, or are you going to use one system across the board? But I imagine, because I don't know how many people are still applying on pencil and papers at places. I imagine it's just going to be some sort of click-through disclaimer.
Yeah. And this was brought up, this was in the news recently, with the end of affirmative action as we know it. We're seeing a little bit of an upswell of white male discrimination, organizations coming out, raising money. Just really quick, Keith, your take on, I assume there are no laws around this and you guys won't act unless there's a law, but do you have any opinion on this, I guess, groundswell of poor white guys that are getting discriminated against?
So the legal term against that is called reverse discrimination. It's been around for a very long time. And we've seen, before the Harvard case, if you look it up, there's been really large cases of reverse discrimination. And when it happens, the monetary fines are pretty significant. And, just as everyone knows, you can't say I'm firing this person because of their of this color or their this gender. Same thing. You can't say I'm hiring this person because of this. And that's where some of that gets lost. So, you've seen some very public examples of job descriptions or tweets saying, well, I'm only hiring somebody that looks like this, from this country, of this religion, this age, this gender, this sexual orientation. And although they may have lofty goals to diversify their workforce, and there's a lot of different ways to do that, and both of coming from the OFCCP and federal contractor space, there's a lot of lawful ways to diversify your applicant pool. But ultimately, those decisions, just like terminations, have to just be based on the skill and merit and qualifications of that candidate. And same internally with some of these reverse discrimination cases that have historically happened. It's saying, okay, well, we need to lay off. We need to do a reduction in workforce, right? Before, you saw a lot of those claims with older workers, right? Well, let's get rid of the old illegal. And now, some of the more recent claims, the accusations have been, well, we hired a very diverse workforce after our company has instituted these diverse hiring and DE&I programs. So now some of them are newer employees. We don't want to fire them, so let's just fire, people who aren't diverse, and that is just as illegal as anything else. So the technical term is reverse discrimination, and obviously there's going to be an increase of that with the Supreme Court talking about race-conscious college admissions. It's just going to creep over. But again, it's one of these things that has been unlawful for a long time. You just see an increase of those cases when making knee-jerk reaction of who do we need to get rid of first, or in that sense.
Got it. Well, this has been fantastic. I know I'm a little bit smarter thanks to our attendees. I am Cheese. The bald guy is Chad. We are the Chad and Cheese podcast. Mona and Keith, thanks for joining us. For anyone out there and the viewers, where can they find out more about you, connect with you? Keith, is there an online thing they should read for guidance going forward?
Yeah, just the same places, LinkedIn, Twitter, where all of us convene. And of course, if you are discriminated against, you can file a charge of discrimination in one of our over 50 offices around the country.
Not you, Cheesman.
In a jurisdiction nearest you. So eeoc.gov is where all the information you can find.
Awesome. Mona, take us out. Where can we find you?
Well, also on LinkedIn, but also on my website, monasloan.org. You can also find more information about the work my lab is doing. And thank you so much, guys. It's always a pleasure. It's wonderful to talk with you again, Commissioner, and I look forward to more.
Love it.
Excellent.
You can find us at chadcheese.com. Special thanks to Jim for putting this all together. Chad, you know how we end our shows. We out.
We out.